Hello again, Ms. Julie here with another story from the public library. Before we get started on this story, there are a lot of words in it that I could define for you ahead of time so that you would maybe enjoy and understand the story a little bit better. There were words I had to look up. For instance, grizzle. I had never heard of grizzle being used to mean complain. I always thought of it as meaning that your hair was going gray. Okay, so to waft is to float away in the air. So a feather could get wafted up in the breeze. Aloft is where you would get wafted. For instance, the air balloon went aloft. To quibble is to have trivial objections, like I knew a couple once who kept arguing about whether the pinkish color they were looking at was salmon or coral. Yeah, it was of no consequence. To cavil is to make petty, unnecessary objections. For instance, they wasted a lot of time when they cavilled about the cost of stamps. As I said before, to grizzle means to complain or whine. To bobble is to move with an irregular bouncing motion, like a young boy bobbled down the sidewalk on his pogo stick. To hobble means to walk awkwardly, like maybe because you're injured, or maybe your heels are too high. Joggle means to move with repeated small jerks, like my bicycle bounced and joggled on the rough road. Cavorting means jumping or dancing around excitedly. You could say, the kids were cavorting in the yard with the puppy. A slogger is a person who's plodding or trudging along. The slogger had to get through the tall weeds before he could run on the path again. To swivel is to twist in part, so you can have like a swivel chair or a fan that swivels to blow on different parts of the room. To grabble is to like grope around on your hands and knees searching for something. Like, when I dropped my glasses in the theater, I had to grabble about on the sticky floor. Huddled means gathered together in a close mass, like the kittens huddled together to keep warm. Bibble is another one I had to look up. I always thought it meant drinking too much, but it says it's eating or drinking noisily, and maybe a baby would make bibbling sounds if it was bobbling in a bubble. Nefarious means wicked, criminal, or involved in organized crime. Remember Dr. Nefario from Despicable Me? They gave him that name so that you'd know that he's up to no good. Emphasis means special importance or prominence. For instance, in the library, you're expected to be tidy and careful and quiet, with special emphasis on the being quiet part. You've probably heard the word civil used in expressions like civil rights. That means rights that ordinary citizens should have. But in this story, civil means courteous or polite, like people who say please and thank you. Divested often means to deprive of power, rights, or possessions, but in this story it just means they took something from somebody. To quiver here means to tremble or quake, and to quaver means to shake or tremble when you're speaking. To shrivel means to wrinkle or contract, like a leaf that dries up. And to wilt means to go limp or droop in the heat, like a plant that doesn't get any water. Fizzle means a kind of feeble hissing or sputtering, so like a candle or a firecracker can fizzle out. A tartan kilt is kind of a Scottish plaid skirt-like piece of clothing, and very handsome they are too. A hovel is a small, squalid, humble dwelling, so if you're living out of a shed, you might be living in a hovel. A chapel steeple is a church tower with a pointy spire. A canon, in this case, isn't one of those things that fires cannonballs, but is a church official. A treble is someone who sings the highest part in a singing group. The rabble are a disorderly crowd or an unruly mob. To prattle is to talk at length in an inconsequential or foolish way. In other words, a lot of chit-chat about nothing. Tittle-tattle is idle talk or gossip. I knew a fellow who liked to stroll down to the corner barber shop for the latest tittle-tattle. Gabble is rapid, unintelligible talk, utterly meaningless sounds. Sometimes babies just gabble. Drivel is nonsense. I had a fellow who could go on and on about how the earth was flat. It was drivel. Scrabble meant to keep track of on a board, but programs like Spotify and iTunes now use a Scrabble program to keep track of your preferences. Dumbfounded means astonished or amazed. I had a friend who dyed her hair bright green once, and I was so dumbfounded I couldn't speak. To goggle is to stare with wide-eyed amazement. And I probably goggled at my friend who dyed her hair green. To be boggled is to be astonished or overwhelmed. My green-haired friend confessed that when she dyed her hair green, she was hoping her parents would find it mind-boggling. A flummadiddle is something completely nonsensical or ridiculous, worthless frills. I had a friend once who glued buttons all over her bicycle. What a flummadiddle. Something in a muddle would be something in a disordered or confused state. The wind blew my papers around and it was a complete muddle. Wow, that was a lot of words, but now you'll be ready for the story. Bubble Trouble by Margaret Mahy. Illustrated by Polly Dunbar. Published by Clarion Books. Read by Julie Yekel. Little Mabel blew a bubble, and it caused a lot of trouble. Such a lot of bubble trouble in a bubble-bobble way. For it broke away from Mabel as it bobbed across the table, where it bobbled over Baby, and it wafted him away. The baby didn't quibble. He began to smile and dribble, for he liked the wibble-wobble of the bubble in the air. But Mabel ran for cover as the bubble bobbed above her, and she shouted out for Mother, who was putting up her hair. At the sudden cry of trouble, Mother took off at the double, for the squealing left her reeling, made her terrified and tense. Saw the bubble for a minute, with the baby bobbing in it, as it bibbled by the letter-box and bobbed across the fence. In her garden, Christa Gribble had begun to cry and cavil at her lazy brother Greville reading novels in his bed. But she bellowed, "Gracious, Greville," and she grovelled on the gravel when the baby in the bubble bibble-bobbled overhead. In a garden folly, Tibble and his jolly mother Sybil sat and played a game of Scrabble, shouting shrilly as they scored. But they both began to babble and to scrabble with the Scrabble as the baby in the bubble bibble-bobbled by the board. Then crumpled Mr. Copple and his wife, a crabby couple, set out arm in arm to hobble and to squabble down the lane. But the baby in the bubble turned their hobble to a joggle as they raced away like rockets, and they never limped again. Even feeble Mrs. Threeble, in a muddle with her needle, matching pink and purple patches for a pretty patchwork quilt, when her older sister told her, tossed the quilt across her shoulder as she set off at a totter in her tattered tartan kilt. At the shops a busy rabble met to gossip and to gabble, started gibbering and goggling as the bubble bobbled by. Mother, hand in hand with Mabel, flew as fast as she was able, very trouble lest the bubble burst or vanish in the sky. After them came Greville Gribble in his nightshirt with his novel, all about a haunted hovel, held on high above his head, followed by his sister Christa, though her boots had made a blister. Then came Tibble pulling Sybil with the Scrabble for a sled. After them the Copple couple came cavorting at the double. Then a jogger, quite a slogger, joined the crowd, who called and coughed. Up above the puzzled people, way up toward the chapel steeple, rose the bubble with the baby, slowly lifting up aloft. There was such a flummadiddle, Mabel huddled in the middle. Canon Dapple left the chapel, followed by the chapel choir, and the treble singer Abel threw an apple core at Mabel as the baby in the bubble bobbled up a little higher. Oh, they giggled and they goggled until all their brains were boggled as the baby in the bubble rose above the little town. "With the problem let us grapple," murmured kindly Canon Dapple, "and the problem we must grapple with is bringing baby down. Now let Mabel stand on Abel, who could stand and turn on Tibble, who could stand on Greville Gribble, who could stand upon the wall, while the people from the shop stand to catch them if they topple. Then perhaps we'll reach the bubble, saving baby from a fall." But Abel, though a treble, was a rascal and a rebel, fond of getting into trouble when he didn't have to sing. Pushing quickly through the people, Abel clambered up the steeple with nefarious intentions and a pebble in his sling. Abel quietly aimed the pebble past the steeple of the chapel at the baby in the bubble, wibble-wobbling way up there. And the pebble burst the bubble, so the future seemed to fizzle for the baby boy who grizzled as he tumbled through the air. What a moment for a mother as her infant plunged above her. There were groans and gasps and gargles from the horror-stricken crowd. Sybil said, "Upon my honor, there's a baby who's a goner." And Christa hissed with emphasis, "It shouldn't be allowed." But Mabel, Tibble, Greville, and the jogger, Chris and Neville, didn't quiver, didn't quaver, didn't drivel, shrivel, wilt. But as one they made a swivel, and with action firm but civil, they divested Mrs. Threeble of her pretty patchwork quilt. Oh, what calculated catchwork! Baby bounced into the patchwork, where his grizzles turned to giggles and to wriggles of delight. And the people stared dumbfounded as he bobbled and rebounded, till the baby boy was grounded, and his mother held him tight. And the people there still prattle, there is lots of tittle-tattle, for the glory in the story, young and old folk, gold and gray, of how wicked Treble Abel tripled trouble with his pebble, but how Mabel and some others saved her brother and the day. I hope you enjoyed Bubble Trouble. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you come back for more crafts and stories from the Public Library.